At December 16, 1944, Bastogne, Belgium. Snow fell in thick, silent sheets over the Ardennes forest. In a shallow foxhole, illuminated only by the flicker of distant artillery, Sergeant Charles Charlie Kincaid held a small, worn photograph close to his chest. The image showed a young woman, seated on a wooden pier somewhere far from the war. Her smile soft, hopeful, untouched by winter or fear. Before the guns thundered at dawn, before the Battle of the Bulge erupted into chaos, a soldier whispered a promise into the cold wind. A promise to return to the woman he loved, and a promise the war would challenge at every turn. The ground trembled. German 88s screamed overhead. Charlie tucked the photo into his jacket. World War II was fought by millions, but behind each rifle, inside each cockpit, beneath each steel helmet, was a story of love. Some survived. Some did not. This is their untold history. By 1939, the world stood on the edge of catastrophe. Armies mobilized. Nations fell. And lives, ordinary, fragile lives, were swept into a conflict without mercy. German troops crossing the Polish border. British families watching sons march to the station. American newspapers reporting the attack on Pearl Harbor. Women in factories riveting aircraft frames. Strategists measured strength in divisions and tonnage. But hidden beneath the statistics were letters, tens of millions of them, written by hands that trembled not from fear, but from longing. Love in wartime was a paradox. It offered hope, even as the world collapsed. It demanded faith, even when tomorrow was not promised. At March 1943 Bassingbourn Airfield, England. A B-17 Flying Fortress, tail number 124,485, waits on a rain-darkened runway. 23-year-old Lieutenant Samuel Hughes, pilot, reads a letter before climbing aboard. The handwriting is neat, deliberate. Eleanor Brooks, age 21, is not simply a sweetheart. She is an MI6 codebreaker, sworn to silence, her life governed by secrecy. He flew bombing missions over Fortress Europe. She deciphered the messages that predicted his fate. But she could never tell him how close he came, every mission, to never returning. She was trained to remove emotion, but one call sign, one crew, she could never ignore. A decoded intercept appears, heavy flak over Bremen, fighter presence increasing. She exhales sharply. April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above Bremen. Sam Hughes fought for his life. Engines roar. The sky is filled with black bursts of flak. Short pun. Metal tears. Hydraulics fail. Smoke fills the cabin. The fortress shudders violently. Sam grips the controls. Oxygen mask frosted with ice. A Messerschmitt dives from above. A shell explodes near the waist gun. Screams. The bomber spins. Her pencil stops. The frequency goes silent. For 18 hours, she believed he was gone. Sam's battered B-17 limps back to England. He emerges, dazed, burned, but alive. Eleanor meets him on the tarmac, breaking protocol for the first and only time. In the shadow of war, even those sworn to secrecy could not hide their hearts. By October 1944, Corporal Daniel Rivas, 141st Infantry, is trapped with the Lost Battalion. Surrounded, outnumbered. Back home, Army nurse Maria Rivas, his wife, tends to wounded soldiers arriving from the French front. She searches every face, every stretcher, every record. No word of Daniel. For days, the Lost Battalion held out, starving, freezing under constant fire. For Maria, each hour was its own battlefield. Guns thunder. Rain turns trenches to mud. Japanese-American soldiers of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team charge through enemy fire to break the encirclement. Explosions light the forest. Shouts echo. Chaos rules. Daniel, exhausted, wounded, watches as the rescuers break through. It was one of the most daring rescues of the war. But for Daniel, survival meant one thing: reaching the woman whose letters kept him alive. Months later, in a military hospital, Maria sees him wheeled into her ward. Thin, scarred, but breathing. Their hands meet. Silence carries everything words cannot. Their reunion was not triumphant or loud. It was quiet, like a prayer finally answered. 1944. Northern Italy. Lucia Bianchi, a 19-year-old Italian partisan, moves supplies through forest trails. She discovers a wounded British POW, Flight Sergeant Arthur Lane, hidden beneath branches. She was sworn to the resistance. He was hunted by German patrols. Their meeting was chance. Their survival depended on trust. Lucia nurses him. Arthur teaches her English words, simple, tender ones. Hope. Home. Together. German patrols close in. Boots crunch snow. Dogs bark. Lucia leads Arthur through mountain passes. Gunshots ring out. They sprint breathlessly across a narrow ridge. Arthur slips. Lucia grips his hand, refusing to let him fall. Love in wartime was often not a whisper, but a desperate, defiant act. They reach Allied lines at dusk, exhausted, shivering, but alive. After the war, Arthur returns to Italy. The camera lingers on the door of a small hillside home. Lucia opens it. They embrace. Some promises survived even the harshest winters. By February 1945, Iwo Jima, Marine Sergeant Hiro Tanaka, born in Hawaii, fights across the volcanic sands. Back home, Japanese-American photographer Aiko Tanaka, his sister, faces discrimination, curfews, and the confinement of internment camps. But she keeps sending him photographs. Sunsets, ocean waves, the home they once shared. The war tested not only nations, but families divided by fear and suspicion. Explosions carve the beach. Smoke blinds the horizon. Hiro charges forward under relentless machine gun fire. He carries one image in his breast pocket, one of Aiko's photographs, edges curled. A mortar lands nearby. Sand, smoke, silence. For 30 minutes, the battle raged without pause. For Aiko, news from Iwo Jima would not arrive for weeks. Hiro survives, wounded but alive. Months later, the siblings reunite outside the internment camp gates. Aiko clutches the letter confirming his survival, the paper damp with tears. For them, the war's end was not victory, but the return of what had been nearly lost. Sam and Eleanor walking along an English airfield. Daniel and Maria holding hands in a hospital garden. Lucia and Arthur overlooking the Italian Alps. Hiro and Aiko standing on a Hawaiian shoreline. History remembers the battles, the dates, the victories and defeats. But beneath the weight of a world at war were hearts that refused to surrender. The war ended. The nations rebuilt. But the love forged in those darkest years, love written in ink and blood, endures. Letters written by hands that trembled not from fear, but from emotion. Letters that carried hope across oceans, deserts, and ruined cities. For soldiers far from home, love became a compass. It offered direction when battlefields erased every familiar landmark. And in a world collapsing into darkness, love became proof that humanity endured. Yet these stories, quiet, fragile, often hidden, rarely reached the official histories. They were private wars, fought within the larger war. As continents burned, so too did hearts, with loyalty, longing, sacrifice, and sometimes unbearable silence. April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet above France. The roar of engines. A B-17 bomber shakes violently as flak bursts like black blossoms around it. Inside, First Lieutenant David Harrington, age 24, grips the controls. Sweat beads along his hairline despite the sub-zero cold. Tucked into his flight jacket, a folded letter sealed with dark blue ink. David Harrington was a farm boy from Iowa. Before the war, he worked sunrise to sunset, tending fields with the woman he hoped to marry, Anna Whitmore. He carried her last letter on every mission. He read it before every takeoff. It was his ritual and his shield. A German Messerschmitt dives past his cockpit. "We're hit," 2 o'clock low. Alarms wail. Love cannot stop bullets, but it can give a man the will to fight through the fire. The bomber plunges downward, smoke trailing through the clouds. Thousands of miles away, another story unfolded in a crowded field hospital on the Eastern Front. March 1943, near Stalingrad. Snow blows through shattered windows. Nurses rush between stretchers. Elena Mikhailovna, a Soviet military nurse, kneels beside a wounded artillery officer, Sergeant Mikhail Voronov. His uniform is torn. Blood stains the snow beneath him. They met in the ruins of a dying city. Both young, both exhausted, both unsure whether morning would come. Mikhail winces, gripping her wrist, not out of strength, but desperation. In the darkest winter of the war, their connection became a fragile warmth. German artillery thunders outside. Elena looks toward the window, then back at him. If you can survive tonight, I'll tell you my name again in the morning. He tries to smile, fails, but his eyes remain open. 1944, Bletchley Park, England. Rows of women in uniform sit before Enigma cipher machines. The room hums with gears, switches, and quiet concentration. One of them is Margaret Spencer, 22, a brilliant mathematician recruited into secret government work. She writes a coded note on a scrap of paper. To Tom, I am safe. I miss you. I cannot tell you more. She folds it, slips it into a thin envelope. Margaret had fallen in love with a Royal Navy officer, Lieutenant Thomas Calder. But she could not tell him where she worked, or why she sometimes vanished for days. Across oceans, the two lovers exchanged words wrapped in secrecy, each letter a thread reaching through the fog of war. Wind howls. Machine rotors click. A decoded message prints. U-boat Wolfpack moving toward convoy HX 341. Margaret stiffens. She knew the convoy included Tom's ship, but she could never warn him. She presses trembling hands to her forehead. David Harrington was a farm boy from Iowa. Quiet, earnest, a man who had never crossed an ocean, until war sent him into the clouds. He had proposed to Anna Whitfield the night before shipping out. No ring, just a vow. The war would decide the rest. At 27,000 feet, David clung not to the controls, but to a promise. The B-17 drops. Metal tears. Oxygen masks ice over. The mission was simple. Hit the rail yards at Rouen. But flak turned routine into chaos. A sudden explosion rattles the frame. The crew hesitates, waiting on their pilot's command. It was then David made the choice that marked him forever. He steadies the aircraft, refusing to jump. The bomber descends through cloud and fire. He risked his life to save the lives of the men behind him, because he believed he had something worth returning to. The B-17 limps back across the channel. Landing gear collapses. The plane skids to a halt, broken, but alive. David stumbles out, falls to his knees, and presses Anna's letter to his forehead. He wrote to her that night, I kept my promise today. One day, I'll keep the rest. January 1943, Stalingrad outskirts. A field hospital stands beneath a frozen, colorless sky. Inside, Nadia Ivanova, a Soviet nurse barely 22, works tirelessly. Her hands move swiftly, steadily, despite the cold that cracks her skin. On a stretcher lies Mikhail Varnin, a Red Army sergeant wounded by shrapnel. Nadia and Mikhail met in the ruins of Europe's coldest hell. Their first words were not of love, but survival. Nadia leans over him. Yet in a place where death arrived every hour, tenderness became stronger than fear. They grow closer as weeks pass, sharing food when there is none, stories when silence becomes unbearable. But Soviet command orders Mikhail back to the front. Their time together lasted 28 days. 28 days that neither history nor war would record, but each of them carried for the rest of their lives. As he departs, he hands Nadia a small wooden carving, rough, unfinished. Stalingrad consumed hundreds of thousands. Whether their love survived, no one can say, only that it existed fiercely, while the world fell apart around them. As the war raged from the skies over France to the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, love quietly defied the darkness. Letters traveled farther than armies. Promises outlasted explosions. And within the vast machinery of war, individual hearts continued to fight battles of their own. David Harrington, a young American pilot who risked his life mid-air to keep a vow to his fiancée. Nadia Ivanova and Mikhail Varnin, a Soviet nurse and a wounded soldier whose brief romance burned brightly in the ruins of Stalingrad's hell. Together, these stories reveal a central truth. In a world swallowed by war, love became the one thing powerful enough to survive in memory, even when people did not.